I saw light where there should have been only ceiling paint and the slow fan. It was a clean, impossible light, not harsh, but like someone had poured clear water into the room and the water remembered a shape. The shape folded itself into a body that moved like a river. Its eyes were not eyes, exactly. They were depths that made my breath feel foreign. A voice arrived not through my ears, but through the hollow where my thoughts live. Your secrets about wealth are invisible chains, it said, and the words warmed the back of my skull. A touch, or the memory of a touch, skimmed my forehead. My head hummed. My nerves rearranged themselves as if waking to new instructions. Would you believe me if I told you everything you think about money is a shadow of a larger architecture? I did not want to believe it. I wanted, for a flash, to crawl under my blanket and wish the world would go back to being ordinary. Then the light breathed again, as if the room itself had inhaled a different law. The night held a promise I did not yet have words for, and the promise was watching me. Before that night, I was Robert Navarro. 52 years of counting other people's numbers and failing to keep my own. My small apartment smelled of old coffee and detergent. The clock over the sink ticked with a dry sound, like a ledger closing page by page. There were 3 missed calls on the phone. The third notice from the bank lay folded on the table like a verdict. 30 days was written in bold at the top. The landlord's name felt like a weight in my throat. My days were rituals of survival. I woke too early to a light that had no color. I made coffee that tasted of metal. I wore the same suit until the cuffs frayed. A uniform of someone who kept showing up hoping the world would mistake him for prepared. I kept a folder of resumes that had become a paper fortress against shame. At night, I repeated a small, bitter chant. People like me don't rise. It was soft and true in a way that cut like an honest instrument. That sentence sat in my chest and tightened every time an opportunity slipped away. I had tried the usual things. I read the books that everyone recommended. I sat in front of a mirror and said the lines they taught me. I visualized checks. I made lists. The words felt hollow. My hands did not match them. The more I practiced the pep, the more my body seemed to memorize failure. Each attempt left me more convinced that the system was not failing me, I was failing the system. The irony tasted like rust. On a gray Wednesday, an email vanished, the last prospect I had. Found someone with fresher ideas, the note said. My stomach turned to ice. I walked home with 6 reis in my pocket and the weight of 30 nights closing in. The corridor smelled of stale paint and the neighbors cooking. I pressed the key into my apartment door and felt the scrape of a life that had become too small for me. That night, sleep arrived like an absent friend. I lay on my back and watched the ceiling peel with a slow, familiar disgust. I could hear the building's pipes talk in the thin hours, a tired conversation of water and time. My heartbeat had the rhythm of worry, flat, persistent, a metronome of not enough. I tried to imagine anything else. I tried to imagine a future where bills dissolved. The image would not hold. My muscles stayed in the posture of someone who expects the world to say no. Then the air changed. It was not a movement at first. It was a pressure, like when someone presses a thumb gently on an old bruise. The light in my room shifted, not brighter, but rearranged. The dust motes stopped behaving like dust and began to map themselves into slow, deliberate currents. The sound in the room low, a hum that sat behind my teeth, was precise. I felt the hair along my arms stand like tiny antennas. A soundless frequency threaded through the room and pulled the edges of my attention into a single, thin point. I do not know when disbelief becomes curiosity. For me it was a slippage. The part of me that had already prepared for catastrophe leaned forward. The part that had been collecting small, quiet hopes since childhood made a delicate, foolish opening. There was a hunger under my fear, the kind that smells like survival and remembers old joy. If you are watching this now, and you are still on the edge of what is possible, know this. The signal that finds you is quieter than your excuses and louder than your shame. I almost turned away. I moved a finger. The room answered with a shiver. A small aside, and please forgive the interruption in the story. If this account lands with you and you want more, subscribe to this channel. The next chapters are intense. If you leave a comment with your city and country, it helps me know where these stories land. We are small and learning. 1,000 followers would change how often I can share what came next. Back then I still thought I would prove it was a trick. I thought I could catalog every possibility that night. A power surge, a dream, a hallucination brought on by stress. My training as an accountant made me search for receipts even inside the impossible. But the room kept answering me in ways ledgers cannot record. The temperature dropped. The air around my chest tightened into a cold band and then eased, like a hand releasing a hold. A sound built that I cannot name. It was not a single tone, but a geometry of tones, a swarm that moved in formation. My skin felt as if a distant tide was passing through me. I remember the taste of copper at the back of my teeth. I remember the idea, sudden and ridiculous, that the world might have layers we call everyday and layers we call laws. Then the light condensed. It stopped being everywhere and became somewhere. It became a shape that occupied space with intent. The edges of it were soft as glass and sharp as a new blade. It hung above my bed and watched me like a patient animal. The shape moved with the ease of liquid and the certainty of a seesaw finding balance. It had the presence of something used to waiting decades and the courtesy of someone who does not interrupt. My first reaction was to panic. I scrambled back and hit the wall. My heartbeat was a drum in my ears. The room smelled suddenly like ozone and rain. The shape the being hovered without a sense of rush. It spoke, and the words were not words in the way I know them. They landed as textures on the inside of my skull. Robert, it said. The name sounded like both a comment and an answer. You called without asking. Fear is certain. Wonder is less certain and heavier. I felt both. My hands trembled. I thought, am I dying? Or am I waking into a new rule? I touched my temple, as if I could test whether my thoughts were still private. The being, if it could be called that, extended what might have been fingers. They did not touch me. They set a symbol between their hands, a form of geometry that refused to belong to Euclid. It spun slowly and made a light that felt like a question. Do not name this as miracle, it said, not loud but explicit. Name it as pattern. Your species mistook maps for territory. You signed contracts with shadows. The voice did not lecture. It dropped images, the underside of waves, a radio dial finding a station, the tiny movements of an ant carrying a grain. Each image felt like a key pressed into something inside my ribs. I wanted to run toward the kitchen light, to flick the switch and return to the simple failure of sockets and bills. I wanted to prove it false and go to bed. The being tilted its head, and the room rearranged itself with such gentle force that my wish to deny it felt suddenly absurd. The world had become a room that could be tuned. The notion that money was only paper seemed at once crude and incomplete. Your secrets about wealth are made of habits, it said. Chains worn as comfort. Instructions you recite. The phrase landed like a stone and created more ripples than I could count. I saw, in the scant seconds between beats, the list of little behaviors that formed my life. The way I smiled when I owed someone, the way my hands clenched around coins, the times I lowered my eyes when a contract came. They felt like dominoes. Where are you from? I forced out. My voice sounded like someone else's in that room. The answer came like a breath. From the place where context is made. Call it Zarius. The name unfolded slowly. It was a sound that seemed to contain a compass. There is a moment in any strange encounter where one must decide to be a subject or a witness. I wanted a witness. I wanted to take notes. My accounting habit rose up to inventory what I could verify. The being Zarius did not allow my ledger to feel sufficient. It offered a demonstration. Small, non-committal. A laboratory test performed in a bedroom meant to feel like a chapel. Show me, I said before I could stop myself. Saying the words felt like throwing a rope into a current. Zarius's answer was not to speak, but to widen the... Zarius looked at me with the kind of patience given by those who have watched stars being born. You asked, he said. Now watch. Patterns answer when you speak their code. He did not say how the code could be learned. He did not give a manual. Instead, he reached toward me, and the world narrowed to the space between his presence and my heart. The night held its breath. I had a final, private fear in that thin, suspended instant. What would I need to become to hold what they called abundance? Would I lose what remained of myself? The being Zarius tilted its head like a teacher glad for a question. You will not become someone else, it replied. You will remember the architecture that already shapes you. That was the promise. That was the door. I did not yet know what lay beyond, but I felt the pull of a possibility that required courage rather than proof. The next move, I sensed, would be an experiment meant to rewire not my bank account, but the way I inhabited my body and its claims. The night did not end. It promised a test. It promised a reckoning with a very human fear, that the thing we most want will demand we change the story we tell ourselves to get it. I lay there, listening to the echo of Zarius's words in the bones of my ears, and waited for the first proof to answer me back. The proof was closer than the daylight, and it would arrive in a way I would never have cataloged in any ledger. The temperature dropped so quickly my breath left a small white cloud. The hum in the walls swelled into a chord I felt in my molars. Light folded like cloth and became a figure standing by the foot of my bed. It had no clothing and every imaginable texture: glass, water, the inside of a bell. My skin prickled. The mattress trembled like something listening. Its voice was not a voice I could locate. It spoke inside my head and across my chest at the same time. Robert, it said, and the name felt like an unlocking. You have been training scarcity into your muscles. I wanted to answer with the tidy skepticism I had kept in my pocket all these years. I opened my mouth to say, you're a projection, an effect of sleep deprivation. But the words dissolved when the being extended what looked like hands and traced a slow, impossible diagram in the air. The lines were not lines, but a movement of light that slid through the space like an idea made visible. The air tasted faintly of citrus and iron. Why me? I asked, the sentence small and human. Because you're asking bent the veil, it answered. The reply arrived as a cascade of images. A child dropping a stone into water, a bell being rung on the far side of a valley, a radio dial finding a hidden frequency. Each image landed as sensation: the dampness of river mud, the echo of weather, the prick of static on my tongue. The being Zarius moved with a slowness that suggested patience measured in centuries. Its eyes, if I can call them that, contained a depth like double windows into winter nights. When it looked at me, I felt both seen and measured. Not judged, measured. It did not offer explanations, only manifestations. A small orb of light slid from its palm and hovered above my old wooden desk. The orb whispered against a ribbon of silence, and then reached for the folder of resumes like a moth to a flame. There was a warmth, then a cold. A thin, precise event folded over the paper and altered something so small I could not name it. The resume that had been ignored found itself highlighted in a new way in my mind. It shifted from list to story. Patterns, Zarius said. Not prayers, not commands. Patterns that you carry and repeat. I felt the truth of that in the way my shoulders dropped and rose, in the tiny adjustments of my jaw, in the way my feet had learned to make themselves small. The bird of an old habit in my chest fluttered and then quieted. There are small acts that make a life a grammar. I had been speaking a poor grammar. Teach me, I said, because the human part of me wanted a rule to study. I wanted a protocol I could print and check off. I was an accountant before I was a man made of longing. The thought of a method calmed me. Zarius's reply was an arrangement of sounds that felt like a bell and like water, and then words. We do not teach. We reveal what you have forgotten. You will remember by living it. It offered a first practice. Not a list of affirmations, but an embodied instruction. Sit, it said. Breathe as if your home is already whole. I sat on the floor because that is where we had first met language in its raw form, a child's living room floor when the adult structures fall away. I planted my feet. The room was cold. I felt the wooden slats under my palms. Zarius's presence warmed the air just enough to keep my skin from fearing frost. I breathed like someone who had known safety as a muscle. See your home as already resolved, Zarius instructed. Not in images, in sensation. Find the weight of the lock turning. Find the taste of a calm meal. Move as if your chest trusts the world. The words were simple. The act was not. I let my body adopt the posture of someone whose housing was secure. Slow spine, relaxed jaw, hands resting in quiet. I breathed in the way a person breathes when they expect no sudden knocks at the door. I let gratitude saturate the space like a warm cloth. For 10 minutes my body practiced belonging. Then Zarius said one thing I still remember like a stamp. Do not ask. Remember. The instruction was an inversion. Asking is future-facing and hungry. Remembering is present-facing and full. I felt my chest loosen as if a cord had been untied. My mind, trained to expect lack, trembled between hope and suspicion. 3 days later, the first signal arrived that could be measured by a ledger. A message from an old colleague who had not spoken to me in years. He wrote, "We are launching a small project. Your experience is the missing story. Can we talk?" The words were brief and bureaucratic, but the effect was a hinge. The email opened a door in the world that had been closed with the soft, precise action of a memory finding its trigger. I could have chalked it up to luck. I could have folded it into the old grammar of randomness. But the taste in my mouth, that hint of citrus and iron, returned. The small orb of light in my memory pulsed. I felt the pattern answering me back. I told no one at first. Part of me feared ridicule. Part of me feared the necessary work that would follow belief. I am a man who knows the social currency of skepticism. I used it like a code in public. When my brother, Edward, heard a garbled version of the story, he laughed. "You're dramatic," he said. He leaned in with the comfort of someone who prefers the ledger of facts. He shook his head and walked away. His laughter left a bruise like a remembered slap. People are tools for cultural gravity. When those who anchor us refuse to move, gravity tightens. Edward's reaction made me shrink. A small, old voice, the one I had grown used to feeding, whispered, "See, it was luck. Go back to the drawer of certainties." That night, I sat on my balcony and felt the sea of the city spread below. The streetlights looked like an inbox of tiny, patient possibilities. Zarius did not appear in physical form. His voice filtered into the place where decisions are born. "Courage is not the absence of fear," he said through that narrow place in the skull. "Courage is forwarding the new grammar inside your body." So I tried again. I practiced the posture at dawn. I breathed as if the lock turned with ease. I let my hands move like someone who counts money, not with longing, but with the pleasant curiosity of a gardener counting seeds. Small changes compounded. My attention shifted from what I lacked to how my body kept telling itself stories about lack. One afternoon, the small contract arrived. Not a windfall, not a miracle. A modest retainer and a promise of long-term work. The number did not dazzle, but it was steady. In 3 months, I was paying off the small debts. In 4 months, I had enough to offer the landlord a payment plan that felt like respect. The relief that bloomed in my belly was not a trumpet. It was a tide that rewired my posture. People started asking what had changed. They noticed a calm in my eyes. I noticed how my shoulders no longer folded, as if expecting a slap. The more I practiced the posture, the less I needed to explain. Others began to move closer, sometimes with curiosity, sometimes with the same disbelief that had once kept me safe. Offers arrived like small ripples, and then like consistent waves. My life shifted from a series of short, anxious transactions to an unfolding of small, steady agreements. But the real change was not in money. It was in vocabulary. I stopped saying, "I can't," the way a seasoned professional. The room still carries the scent of rain and citrus when I remember. I have new routines now. A slow morning breath, a pause before I answer a phone, a habit of walking as if streets were friendly. The stakes in my life are different. I still pay bills. I still balance ledgers. But I do so from a body that expects support rather than a world that must be coaxed into compassion. And the being Zarius did not leave as one might imagine. He condensed his presence into something small and ordinary, a symbol I trace with my thumb when I need to remember the posture. Sometimes in the dawn light, I feel that geometry hum under my skin. I place my hand over my heart and say, in the simple loop I have chosen, I am the one who remembers abundance. I do not ask the world to be different. I embody the code that changes it. There is more to the story. There are tests I had to face that looked like relationships and reputations and lonely afternoons of doubt. There are decisions that cost me the comfort of other people's certainty. There are days I still fail to be generous with myself. But the thread that pulled me from the edge is real. A practice of presence, a change of posture, and a willingness to remember rather than to beg. Tonight, the city hums below my window. The light on the water looks like the same pattern I saw in the bedroom that first night. My life is not a miracle ledger. It is a living protocol. I sit with my cup of coffee that finally tastes right and repeat the short line. I am here. I hold enough. I move from belonging. The next part of what I learned is not for giving as a lecture. It is for practicing. It is for those who will try the posture and measure what answers them back. But before that the first demonstration has been done, the rule bent. The ledger shifted one small line. And I understood that the world listens when you change the way you speak to it. The wall peeled open like a secret, but without sound. At first it was only a change in the light, thin veins of blue tracing across plaster. Then the veins joined and something like writing grew, not letters, but living diagrams. They unfurled across the room and settled into themselves, layers folding like paper boats finding still water. I could see equations that behaved like leaves, organic and patient. I could hear the hum of them as if they had weight. My skin prickled. The air tasted faintly metallic and lemon-sweet at the back of my throat. Zarius did not lecture. He pointed with a finger that looked like a stream. The patterns on the wall rearranged into a lattice that pulsed in rhythm with my heart. He let the lines speak in light. He said, simply, money is a notation. Your people treat it like a god because you have no grammar for the field that makes it move. The sentence landed like a coin dropped into a deep well. I watched the ring of it expand inside my chest. He moved his hand slowly and the lattice shifted to show small diagrams of a life. A hand opening, a ledger tilting, a child's laugh, each image linked to a thin waveform. He mapped fear to a tight, narrow wave. He mapped trust to a broad, slow curve. The diagrams smelled faintly of rain on hot asphalt. They tasted like the first sip of coffee that is not bitter. You think you ask, he said. You do not. You repeat instructions. You have trained the body to call scarcity. His voice was inside me. A bell felt behind my sternum. The world obeys the grammar it is given. I found myself watching sentences I had spoken 1,000 times sketched in light. Small creeds of scarcity I had never thought of as ritual. Each one was a knot tied around my ribs. I don't deserve, not for people like me. There is never enough. They hovered above the diagrams like moths. In that moment, I understood the cruelty of routine, not that it fails sometimes, but that it has teeth. Zarius made the lattice spin faster. The room warmed and then cooled like breath over a window. A thread of golden light wove through the equations and touched my resume folder on the desk. It was absurd to watch paper glow. The folder seemed to exhale. My phone, which had been a muted weight on the wood, vibrated. The notification felt obscene in that quiet. An old colleague reaching out, short, businesslike. We need consulting. Can you meet? The words were blunt and ordinary, and they landed in my chest like a small, reckless bird. I looked at Zarius. He smiled without moving his lips. Reflection, he said. Small. Not the law. A mirror of a new grammar. I had been waiting for miracles to arrive with trumpets. This was not a trumpet. It was a hinge. It made my thinking smaller and larger at once. The wall returned to a gentle glow, and the diagrams receded like tide lines on sand. The hum thinned, and Zarius's presence remained as a quiet weight at the edge of perception. I tried to name the feeling. It was not hope. It was not proof. It was a first proof of mechanism, a visible attempt at translation between what lived in me and what arrived outside. My chest loosened as if a band had been removed. He put a bright point of light in his palm and offered it like an apology. You asked, he said, and the system answered. We will not do your life for you. We will return technique and witness. He did not give me a formula. He offered a rule. Change the body first. Embodied remembering, not abstract demand. He told me to sit. He told me to breathe like someone whose home is already whole. I sat on the floor. The wood pressed against my knees, cool and honest. I planted my feet the way I had when I was a boy balancing on a curb. Zarius's light pooled across my thighs like warm water. He guided me through movement. The tilt of a head as if worries were not heavy. Fingers that loosened. A jaw that unclenched. He said, slow and steady, move as if the lock has turned. I complied, partly because the voice made the air feel safer and partly because my muscles, those honest instruments, had been telling me the truth all along. I practiced belonging for 10 minutes. I breathed the way a person breathes in the presence of enough. When it was over, he said only, now forget, and the test began to live without my attention. I held that small experiment like a fragile coin. It fit in the palm of my memory. It did not guarantee anything, but it altered the texture of waiting. When I stood to make coffee, the apartment felt fractionally larger. The patterns on the wall had not disappeared entirely. They lay like a map under the wallpaper of my life. I repeated to myself, out loud, a fragment that would later become my first private loop. I am holding the code of enough. I am the body of welcome. I said it once, and the sound sat in my mouth like an invitation. There would be more tests. The room seemed to narrow its breath around a promise. The next demonstration, he said with a look that held centuries, would not be polite. It would ask more of me than a warm feeling. It would challenge an institution I had built my survival on. He asked for detail. That is what I wanted, a checklist to hang on a peg. Zarius refused to be a list. He wanted my body. He had me sit where light fell diagonally across the floor, the slats marking time like old ledger bars. He set the air to the temperature of a slow Sunday, and the hum in my teeth became a metronome. Not images, he said. Sensation. Use the body's grammar. We worked in small units. I learned to locate the sensation of a locked door opening inside my chest, the looseness behind my heart where worry usually lived. He taught me to breathe into that place as if it were a lung I had not used. He taught me to pace my fingers like someone counting blessings, not debts. The instructions were mundane and precise. Slow inhale, tongue back, gaze soft. Move your shoulders as if the world will hold you. There were micro acts. Place your hand on the table and feel the wood's temperature. Feel gratitude as a pressure behind your sternum. Laugh a little, the kind of laugh that does not demand proof. The work looked like a rehearsal for a small kindness. It felt like exercise for the bones of trust. I stumbled. My mind shoved logic into the gaps. This is placebo, it whispered. You are practicing superstition. Old reflexes are nails in the wall. They hold pictures of previous failure. Every time thought dragged me back, Zarius used a different method. He asked me to move first. Action preceded belief. Do the posture, he said. Belief follows the body. We repeated the ritual until habit began to soften. Then he said the thing that unmoored me again. Now go live. The instruction felt ridiculous. I had been waiting for an external answer. Instead, I received permission to embody the answer. 3 days later, my phone sang a sound that felt like returning to shore. The ring was a stranger's voice at first, then a name I had. Little returns began to accumulate like coins in a jar. The body remembered. A new posture became the default. Shoulders lowered, exhalation longer. I caught myself when I reached for the old mantras and found them odd, like an accent I no longer spoke fluently. I began speaking new loops, quiet and private. I moved from the place of enough. I keep my hands open to receive. I said them sometimes under the fluorescent hum of a grocery store, and sometimes into the pillow at night. Each time the sentence reshaped something in the contours of my chest. Still, the change was not linear. The body learns in spirals. There were afternoons when old fear crept in, a small, greasy thought at the base of my skull. What if this is luck and not law? Those afternoons felt like weather, gray, damp, familiar. I allowed the weather without letting it become the forecast. I tested the method again in a small personal place, relationship. I practiced being the kind of friend who does not flinch when asked for help. I showed up with calm, not for show but because calm had become credible in my chest. 2 separate people responded differently, one with gratitude that felt like sun through new glass, another with suspicion that felt like a closed window. Both responses were data. Both asked me to remain steady. The more ordinary the practice, the more extraordinary the consequences. People began to treat me not as the man who begged for small favors, but as someone who carried an evenness. Offers arrived as if guided by a gentle magnet, not a desperate plea. I was gaining currency in 2 currencies, money and a less obvious one, reliability. It made the ledger of my life feel balanced. But I had not told my brother. I had not intended to. Some things you keep to yourself while you test the weight of them in your hands. The ritual is intimate. Belief is a fragile apparatus. When I finally did tell him, I expected curiosity. I expected a smirk, perhaps, but not the sound of a familiar dismissal that hit like cold iron. He laughed in a way that left me small in a way I knew well. Aliens and codes, he said, and the words were an anvil drop. Or a lucky inheritance. Either way, stop telling stories. His dismissive voice scraped against my new posture. The room where we sat, his kitchen, the tile cool under my palm, seemed suddenly narrow. The coffee tasted thin. His incredulity was not about the facts. It was about a boundary I had crossed. To be seen as different in your family is to risk loneliness. I left with my new money and my old bruises both intact. That night my hands shook not for lack, but as if in rehearsal for grief. Doubt is a softer thing than fear. It is intimate. I lay awake and watched the ceiling as if it might reveal something else. When the voice of a doctor clipped through a telehealth window in the small hours an opinion about stress and psychosis, I felt the old world tuck its chin and wag its finger. The label could be comforting. It could explain the unexplainable in terms the world finds tidy. I listened and felt the floor tilt. Before the floor could let me slide, Zarius's presence arrived like the quiet hand of someone who knows the sea. Doubt is part of the doorway, he said softly. It keeps you honest. But do not let it be the only language you trust. His words were a lighthouse. Not a lighthouse for certainty, but for navigation. Courage, he said, is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to act in spite of it. I had one more question, small and human. How many proofs will I need? I asked. He looked at me like a man who has watched seasons move. Enough to change the way your hands move, he said. Enough to change the scale of what you will allow in. That night, I made a small list on a scrap of paper, practical, unromantic, and folded it into my wallet beside the new bank statement. The list read like a plan. I would not give the knowledge of the method to the world as doctrine. I would live it. I would test it in larger stakes. I would see if the grammar held. Outside, the city went on, lights like patient questions. Inside, my chest held a new rhythm. The next test, I promised myself, would ask for more than a small inheritance. It would ask for reinvention. When Eduardo waved his skepticism like a flag, His face tightened into a map I had memorized since childhood. He is the man who prizes evidence in the form of receipts and disdain. He speaks with the muscle that believes in keeping things small and tidy. I loved him, and yet the way he folded my experience into a punchline hurt like a hand closing an old door. We argued in his kitchen. The light from the window carved a stripe across the table, and dust moved in that stripe like time. He said, "People like us don't fall into explanations. You felt lucky. Stop chasing ghosts." He pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose as if pushing away a theory. I felt my throat narrow. There was a familiar desire to apologize for being foolish, to fold my newness back into the old sweater jacket of caution. It would have been easier. Ease has its own gravity. That night I called a psychiatrist because the world likes to label what it cannot file. The diagnosis offered a tidy shelf: stress-induced psychosis, a possibility to be managed. I sat in the dim light of my apartment and felt exoneration and exile at once. Labels can make you feel decluttered, as if chaos has been boxed and stamped. But a box does not mean the thing inside is not real. Zarius returned not to argue, but to hold a mirror I could step into. "Your world is allergic to what it cannot classify," he said, the words small and exact. "The parts of you that change will be contested. Expect resistance." He did not ask me to prove anything to my brother. He asked me instead to measure the resistance and act in spite of it. "Test larger," he said. "Let the law do what law does. Respond to consistent grammar." The voice of my family was a pressure I had always carried. To change my life meant changing the shape of my relationships. To be right about something that made no sense to them was, in their eyes, a betrayal of the ledger we had all agreed to keep. I remember sitting on my balcony that night and watching the city fold into itself. The streetlights were a scatter of small, steady suns. Zarius spoke through the thin place in my skull. "Courage is not found in absence of doubt. It is a practice. It is showing up when the room says otherwise." Showing up cost me more than money. It cost me the small, well-worn certainties that had shaped my identity. It required a kind of moral responsibility, to be the person who lived the grammar he was learning, regardless of whether the room believed him. I thought of the experiments we had done: the posture, the breath, the small embodied acts. I thought of the inheritance, the retainer, the quiet shift in how people received me. Those were not arguments so much as demonstrations. They were prototypes of a life I might inhabit more fully. Yet the world pushed back. At a family dinner, Eduardo refused to listen. A colleague hinted I was changed and not in a good way. An acquaintance muttered about fortune's favors. The pushback had accents: pity, suspicion, envy. Each response demanded me to be clearer in my own mind about what I was doing and why. So I chose to respond with practice. When skepticism arrived, I returned to posture. When a sneer came, I practiced steadiness. When I felt the urge to explain, I practiced silence. The discipline was less about convincing others and more about refusing to export the noise of doubt into my system. There were subtle gains that no ledger could show. I slept deeper. I walked in a way that took up space without aggression. I returned calls quickly. I paid small debts with a new dignity. People began to trust my timing. Trust begets trust. But there were losses too. Some friendships thinned. A man I had known for 20 years stopped inviting me to meetings where gossip softened into deals. He feared contamination. Grief followed. It is the companion of any real change. Change does not only bring bouquets, it trims branches. Zarius appeared one evening when the sky was iron gray. He did not come with symbols then. He came with a question: which will you choose, the comfortable skeptic or the practicing creator? The choice was not rhetorical. It required me to accept the liability of agency. To be creating reality rather than pleading for scraps is to become responsible for the field around you. Responsibility is heavy in a different way than want. I felt the gravity of it. I also felt the finger traces of new practical habits that had begun to live in my hands. Paying bills on time, answering partners with clarity, declining offers that smelled like compromise. My life started to be shaped not by frantic grabs, but by small, steady boundaries. The evidence accumulated not as miracles, but as new furniture in an apartment that had been sparse. One night, alone at the desk with my coffee cooling, I traced the symbol Zarius had shown me during that first night in impossible geometry my thumb knew now by muscle memory. The symbol hummed beneath the skin when I pressed it. It felt like a signature. Zarius's presence thinned that evening to a frequency I could carry. "You will be tested again," he said. "The test will not stop because you answer one. They will scale. That is the way of a living grammar." I felt the truth of it in my bones. The resistance of the world was not a verdict. It was a climate. I would live in it or leave. I chose to live. There was a final, quieter thought he left me with. "You will not prove this to everyone. You will prove it to the body that carries you. Act in a way that your hands can live with." I folded that sentence into my wallet next to the small list I had made. It fit there like a coin. The next move would be mine and unshared. A larger experiment, a bolder test. The room outside my window held its breath. The next proof would demand not only posture, but a scale of change that risked both reputation and comfort. I felt fear. I felt hunger. And under both, a thin, steady thread of readiness. The door had opened. I could either step through or close it gently and keep the world tidy. I put on my coat. The night air smelled like the sea and something like possibility. I walked toward the choice. The next act would not be small. I sat where the light fell in a narrow bar across the floor, the same place where the first experiment had lived in my muscles. The apartment smelled of lemon cleaner and old paper. My hands found the grain of the table. I breathed slow, letting my ribs widen as if they were carrying weight already borne. The air felt cool on the back of my neck. I said nothing aloud at first. Inside, I said a sentence like a seed. "I am the man who keeps enough." It slid into my chest like a small coin. I began the work the way Zarius taught me. Posture first. Shoulders back, chin level, feet planted like the roots of a tree. I breathed into the place behind my sternum that had once been cramped by lists. I let gratitude fill it, not theatrical gratitude, but the steady, muscle-level recognition of sufficiency. I moved my fingers as if signing checks that had already cleared. My mouth shaped smiles that did not need proof. The body took the message before the mind could argue. I did not visualize numbers. I moved as if my day-to-day choices were already in the currency of abundance. When the office light hummed low and the kettle boiled at the neighbor's window, I practiced small acts. I answered emails with calm. I set a fair fee and left it. The gestures were ordinary. The effect was not always immediate. But the world responds to grammar, Zarius had said, and I kept composing sentences with my hands. Two small responses came first. A colleague returned a call I had made months ago and offered a short contract. He spoke with the kind of respect that sits in the voice when someone assumes competence. My chest loosened. Later, a client I had helped pro bono months before called to say she had recommended me to a partner. Her thanks was tangible, an introduction that turned into a steady retainer. The signs were small coins, not fireworks. Still, they added up. I pushed for a larger signal. I applied the same embodied habit to the meeting with the man launching the education startup. I arrived early. I let my breathing carry the posture I had practiced, calm, steady, unhurried. The room had the smell of fresh coffee and new paper. He watched me without hurry. At one point he leaned forward and said, "We need someone real, someone who has rebuilt in the trenches." My voice answered before my doubt. I know how to translate real recovery into teachable steps. My hands were steady when I signed the contract. The contract was the first real pivot. The salary was more than I had dared to plan. The participation clause felt like possibility given form. After I left the office, a street vendor called a number that matched the pattern of the days before, small confirmations, nods from the world. I walked home with a receipt in my pocket and the sound of distant traffic like applause. My palms did not shake. The weight I had carried for years felt lighter by degrees. In the months that followed, the pattern repeated itself, each time escalating. A neighbor I had once avoided for fear of having nothing to offer knocked on my door with an old ledger of contacts. It looked at first like charity. It turned into introductions. An accountant I had once admired called to ask if I would consult on a restructuring. I found myself saying yes more easily than I had said no in other seasons. My days ordered themselves. Money moved. I paid debts in ways that felt civil. I bought the apartment with cash, the numbers cold and real, and I felt something warmer than relief, integrity. I had asked nothing from the universe except to live the grammar I had practiced. Not everything bent without friction. Old friends drifted. One man, who had traded gossip for deals, stopped inviting me to conversations where favors were traded like currency. The absence stung, but the ache was honest. It was the trimming that often precedes growth. I learned to make room for the losses with the same posture I used to make room for gains. In bed at night, I repeated a short loop that had become mine. I move from enough. I receive with hands open. I keep my steps measured. The words shaped my nights. There were micro tests that felt cruelly simple. A late invoice that should have cleared did not. My old panic rose, old as hunger. I sat at the sink and did the breath. I mouthed the loop once, twice. I sent one succinct email, then another polite reminder. The invoice cleared within 48 hours. My body registered the response. Less adrenaline, more steady warmth behind the rib cage. The miracle, if you call it that, was not a bolt from the sky. It was the world rearranging itself around a different set of hands. I kept records like a mild scientist. Dates, small signs, shifting tone in emails, the cadence of my own voice returning to steadiness. I taught myself to notice the weather of opportunity. Each micro-event was a data point. Each time my posture preceded my thought, the slope of chance tilted toward me. The test was done not once, but many times. The grammar held, and yet I knew the stake would rise. I could feel a wider proof waiting at the edge of the experiment, something that would no longer be about money alone, but about identity. I felt it in the hollow under my ribs, a pressure that asked, will you become the person whose actions define your limits? The next test would demand more than payments and sign pages. It would ask for a scale large enough to rewrite not only my bank balance, but my sense of self. The city hummed outside. The night opened like a mouth. The next proof was coming. The night, when Xerius returned, was clear and cold. Stars pricked the sky like small, slow pulses. Inside, the apartment smelled faintly of lemon and paper and something new like the inside of a sealed envelope. His light was softer this time, not a flash but a bloom. He moved through the room like a tide, and the air thickened in a way I could feel behind my teeth. He did not speak at first. He let silence stretch so that my own heart sounded too loud. Now you are ready, he said into the place behind my eyes. The words were low and precise. He raised those long, impossible hands and traced a shape in the air. The symbol was different, golden, a lattice of spirals and right angles that fit my palm like a key. My skin prickled where the light brushed it. We sat. He did not hand me another technique. Instead, he offered a phrase and emotion. Recognition is practice. Speak it until your body stops arguing. He placed his empty hands an inch from my chest and whispered, say what you are, not what you want. His voice folded into a pause that asked me to answer. I found my voice. I said, slowly, I am the vessel of abundance. The sentence landed like a coin. My breath steadied. He tilted his head, and my memory produced other forms of the phrase variations that felt like keys for different doors. I am the vessel of abundance. Then, abundance moves through my hands. Then, I am the shape the universe takes when it wants more of my work. Each iteration was a little ritual. Each filled a different muscle. He guided me to make it actionable. When you wake, he said, Speak the sentence and move the hands as if accepting a gift. When you hesitate, touch the palm to the chest. The gestures were simple. They were not magic incantations. They were ways to map the internal state onto a body that others could read. My chest held the quiet of someone who had just learned to pilot a craft. Zarius taught with paradox. He said, "You will find that recognition is less about grabbing and more about clearing." He made a sound like water and did not elaborate. The symbol remained floating between us, humming faintly. "This is not a charm," he said. "It is a map. Use it to know the roads you will not travel." In the following months, I made the codex my scaffolding. It showed up in small, stubborn ways. I declined projects that dimmed me. I accepted ones that matched the tone of my internal sentences. A health improvement came as a quiet consequence. The chronic neck tension that had tightened with worry eased. I slept in deeper cycles. My dentist noted that my jaw no longer clenched. Small bodily losses of old patterns signaled big shifts. I watched relationships change. A woman I had once argued with over money began to ask for advice. She listened differently when I spoke, less to judge, more to absorb. A client who had once pushed deadlines now apologized and admitted that my timing had proven reliable. These were not miracles. They were the social world acknowledging a different internal grammar. Zarius never left me with arrogance. He left me with responsibility. "The code does not spare you from consequence," he said. "It magnifies it. Speak lightly and act with care." He placed the symbol against my sternum. It did not burn. It was an imprint, not a brand. Carry it as practice. Let it be the way your hands move when the world asks a question. I learned to answer the world not with rhetoric, but with small ritual. Morning sentences. A hand to the chest before a decision. Polite, decisive speech. The change made me the kind of person people trusted to steward money and time. I became less a magnet and more a conductor. One night, much later, Zarius looked at me and said, "You will be tempted to teach the code like a ladder. Do not. Teach it like a doorway." He smiled in a way that rearranged the room's light. I understood then that the true work was not replication but translation, helping others translate their inner state into a body the world could read. He left me with a final instruction that was quiet and hard. Practice until refusal becomes furniture. He meant that the ability to stand firm would become ordinary. I practiced until simple refusals felt like folding a shirt. The code had become a set of manners for presence. The night he dissolved into the air, he did not dramatize. He tapped my chest once, like a metronome. "Remember the geometry," he whispered. "You will know when to open the gate." His light thinned. Then he was gone, as if the room simply exhaled. I stood with the symbol warm under my palm and the feeling that I had been given not a truth, but a responsibility. There was one last thing I could not name, then an openness that felt like the hinge of a larger door. The codex had turned knowledge into habit. The door beyond that habit was not yet open. It waited. I felt its draft. After Zarius left, I learned how quickly a body can become an archive. The symbol was not a talisman, but a memory in my bones. I touched my sternum absent-mindedly many times on trains, at meetings, in the middle of the night when doubt crept in. Each touch was a small recalibration. The gesture changed the tenor of my decisions. It made me slow when caution mattered and decisive when action was required. Life rearranged itself in ways both tender and sharp. My days were fuller and quieter at once. I kept appointments on time. I paid people quickly. My energy stopped leaking into anxious rehearsals. Friends came and went. Some returned with new respect. Some left, unable to fit the new contours of my life. A dinner invitation dwindled into a text message that read, "We need different things now." Grief moved through me like a weather pattern, brief storms, then clearer air. People began to ask me for help in ways I had not anticipated. An old client called and said, "Your approach changed our process." A neighbor knocked on my door with a broken pipe in his hands. We fixed it together. While we worked, he told me about a small fund he managed. He mentioned the phrase, steady hands, and then offered to refer me to someone starting a cooperative. The referral became a modest board seat that grounded me in a different kind of work, community finance, not just consulting. I did not become immune to risk. With new influence came new exposure. A public critique appeared in a business column. Someone misread my narrative as luck, not practice. Their words stung. I read them on the bus. The paper creased at my knees. I felt the old reflex to shrink, to explain. Instead, I touched the palm to my chest and breathed the sentence Zarius had taught me, altered for the moment. I am the shape the universe takes through my work. I told myself the truth softly, and then I wrote a calm response that acknowledged difference but did not apologize for my existence. Economically, the changes were visible. I scaled a small program into a workshop that paid teachers and offered sliding fees. I invested with care, not speculation. I set aside reserves. I trained my hands to be the hands that keep enough. My loop had evolved. I keep room. I make space. I welcome measure. Saying it shifted how I budgeted and whom I trusted with capital. The body remembers balance before the ledger does. There were quieter gifts. My sister began to call, not to complain about bills, but to talk about an idea for a small bakery. I listened in a way I had not been able to before. I offered terms, not pity, a loan with repayment that preserved dignity. Months later, she sent a photo of a small counter with loaves lined like soldiers. Her message said simply, "It works." The chest loosened in me again, this time with a tenderness that surprised me. I carried the symbol into ordinary openings, into a conversation with Eduardo when he dared to ask, after a long silence, if he could see the office where I worked. His eyebrows stayed rigid. He stepped into the room and fumbled with a paper cup of coffee. We did not fix everything in an afternoon. We did not make apologies. But he saw the books, the small staff, the steady people who moved like a team. He watched me decline a shortcut in front of him. His look changed in a way I recognized as consideration. It was small. It mattered. Teaching what I had learned proved harder than living it. People wanted formulas, not grammar. I learned to offer presence over prescription. I hosted sessions where I asked people to breathe, to notice the point behind the sternum, to speak one short sentence that belonged to them. Some left unchanged, some left changed. I kept the work modest in scope. It was not my job to convert the world. It was my job to live in it differently. Zarius had given me a shape of practice. The real test was stewardship. I found that stewardship asked for humility. The codex required me to take responsibility for the ripples of my choices. Money moved differently when it was handled with care. People prospered and sometimes did not. I learned to hold both outcomes with even hands. One evening, on the balcony with the sea smelling like iodine and possibility, I traced the symbol with my thumb on the inside of my palm. The salt air made the world look older and kinder. I thought of the night the light had come through my ceiling and reshaped the angles of my life. I thought of Eduardo's skeptical laugh and the woman who had stopped inviting me to gossip. I thought of the neighbors who now called me by name and trusted my timing. Each memory was a stitch. Before I slept, I placed a sentence into the dark, my last loop for the day, the one that had grown like a habit into a compass. I act as if the world already leans my way. I receive what is offered. I return what is owed. The sentence felt honest. It did not promise perfection. It promised practice. Sometimes, in the small hours, I still sensed a presence, less a visitor now and more like a distant lighthouse. It kept its distance. It left me with a question that was also an invitation. What will you do with the map when the gate opens wider? The gate, I thought, was not a single event but a lifetime of choices. The work continues. I make mistakes. I am accountable. I keep repairing what I can. I do not instruct by proclamation. I show by rhythm. People call me for advice, for partnership, for calm. I answer most times with posture and a few words. I show up. I pay attention. If this story leaves you with one thing, let it be this. A life can be rewritten not by a single miracle, but by small, Steady changes in how your hands move. The symbol is a tool, not a throne. The real change is practical humility, a set of habits that allow you to carry what comes. Thank you for staying with my account. If you felt moved, tell me where you are reading from. I keep the gestures now without thinking, the thumb to sternum, the slight opening of the palms as if receiving, the softening of the eyes. They have become rhythms, like breathing. They have become manners. There is a practical list of things that changed, and I do not hide it. My accounts reconciled, a loan honored, a cooperative board that trusted a cautious signature. But the more consequential ledger is internal. I no longer live on the edge of emergency. My chest does not tighten in the same habitual way. My nights are less occupied with rehearsal. I sleep and wake into a quiet that feels like a room with doors closed against needless noise. I keep a daily loop, a short cycle of sentences I say inwardly when the world asks something of me. I learn to make them precise, bodily, and true. My morning loop goes like this. I shape my palms as if holding a book. I breathe into the sternum, and I say softly to myself, I am steady. I receive with care. Later, before a meeting, the loop shortens. My hands keep enough. When doubt presses in, a night sentence unwinds my shoulders. I return what is owed and leave room. Each line is an act, not a wish. Each is a small command to my muscles. These loops are not magic spells. They are commitments to posture. Saying them alters the way I weigh choices. Saying them has altered how others weigh me. People respond to steadiness. They calibrate trust by the rhythm of someone's presence. In interviews in boardrooms, in my sister's bakery, in the quiet of late-night emails, the same small gestures keep me tethered to a standard of care I once flinched away from. I learned to carry consequence lightly. Zarius warned this with a tone that made mischief of gravity. The code magnifies. Bear the ripples with even hands. The words became a rule. If wealth arrives, it is a current. I am a channel, not a dam. I must repair leaks that are my fault and hold boundaries that preserve others' agency. There is no grand moral here. There is only discipline. The discipline to be honest with account and self, to say no when a project leverages someone else's need, to lend only when repayment preserves dignity. People speak to me now differently. They do not always say the thing I want to hear. Eduardo's skepticism did not vanish. His voice is quieter, but sharper. He watches my choices like a man who counts shadows. That friction has value. It keeps me responsible. Friends whom I thought lost return carrying proposals, problem statements, and sometimes small resentments, evidence that life rearranges its furniture and people must find new seats. I meet them with the same steady hands. I practice hospitality that keeps boundaries. There were moments of grief and awkwardness. A former partner called once, voice thin with distance. We sat across from each other in a cafe that smelled of coffee and old arguments. I listened in a way I had not before, not to fix, but to hold a space. The conversation ended without reconciliations. It ended with both of us nodding like people who have learned new roles. The body remembers boundaries before the mind forgives. That insight felt like a small mercy. Work became a laboratory. I teach less doctrine and more exercise. I show people how to trace the sternum with a thumb. I ask them to speak one honest sentence about what steadiness looks like in their lives. Some leave unchanged. Some return changed. The practice is simple. Step into the posture. Make the sentence precise. Act as if the world already leans your way. The surprising part is that people respond to the practice more than to my words about it. Presence, taught as a tool, is less likely to be resisted than belief framed as instruction. There are failures. I made bad investments that looked tidy in spreadsheets and unruly in life. I misread a partner's boundary and had to repair both relationship and contract. These are not annals of shame. They are evidence of the same rules Zarius insisted on. Practice does not spare consequence. It shapes how you meet it. When the mistakes came, I touched my chest, breathed, and named the error aloud. The admission changed tone faster than any argument. It did not erase loss, but it kept me able to act without shame as a ballast. Some mornings, I find myself waiting for a return of the dramatic light, as if Zarius must reappear to validate everything. Then I remember the lesson that landed with his last touch. The symbol is memory, not deity. The responsibility is mine. The mentor was a hinge. The door that hinge opens is still heavy. I live in the hallway between habit and an unknown room. I have learned to steward the small openings. I pay people quickly. I set prices that honor value and allow growth. I build slack into budgets. An old muscle memory of scarcity taught me how to hold margin so another person can breathe. I write contracts with net human impact clauses. I accept invitations to boards when I can add steadiness. I decline when I would only supply optics. The choices are quiet but consequential. There are physical gifts I did not expect. The chronic tension in my neck eased, as if someone loosened a knot I had been wearing for years. I notice my jaw unclenched during meetings. My dentist jokes that my bite is kinder. These are silly details, maybe. They are also proof that posture changes physiology before the ledger follows. At night, on the balcony with the sea smelling like old maps, I practice a breathing set Zarius taught me, adapted to my hands. Breathe in for 4 counts. Hold as if you are receiving for 2. Exhale and place the thumb to the sternum while whispering the sentence. I act as if the world leans my way. I say it 3 times. Then a quiet. I receive what is offered. I return what is owed. The words slow my heart. The hands steady my choices. The world, so far, responds. I do not instruct by proclamation. I show by rhythm. I am careful with language because words shape the pattern of my days. I learn to name things plainly when I speak to teams. We will keep enough, I say. We will leave room. Those phrases are small beacons. They attract people who can hold scale without helping themselves to the edges. The symbol Zarius pressed into me remains an imprint in muscle memory. Sometimes I touch the spot, not to summon fortune, but to remember a posture. The touch is modest. It is an anchor. The real work is habit. Morning sentences, a hand to the chest before decision, steady speech. That scaffolding has allowed me to walk through doors I did not know existed. Before I sleep, I make one short loop that has become my nightly compass. I place my hand on the sternum, breathe, and say, I am the line that steadies the circle. I keep what is enough. It lands like a key. The loop is mine. It is not a slogan to sell. It is a way to end the day with a body that remembers balance. There is still a question that hums at the edge. Sometimes, in the thin hours, a distant cadence returns the memory of Zarius' voice. The geometry of the symbol less a command than an invitation. What will you do when the gate opens wider? The gate is not a single event. It is a lifetime of choices. It is also, I suspect, communal. As I keep steady, I notice openings widen around others. The practice scales not because of sermon, but because steady hands make reliable commitments, and reliability is contagious. So I prepare in the modest way I know. I practice presence. I teach posture. I choose consequence. I steward with even hands. I remain ready for the gate, whatever shape it will take. If you have read this far, I want to ask something small and human. Tell me where you are reading from, city and country, and share one small change you have practiced this week. It matters. It keeps the work alive. If you found this useful, please stay. Subscribe. Come back when the sea sounds different, and we can compare the notes. I will leave you with 3 short sentences I repeat to myself, in order, when the world asks for steadiness. Say them to your chest if you like, and feel your hands learn a new grammar. I receive with care. I keep enough. I return what is owed. There is a draft at the hinge of a larger gate. It asks, softly, who will carry this shape when the door opens wider? I do not know yet what the next room holds. I only know how I will enter, with steady hands and a sentence in my mouth, ready to meet consequence with evenness. I am grateful you stayed. Share your city. Share one small change. We will see what the gate needs next.